Apparently there is
Right.
open source software, but they charge for compiling. There's a fee to get a pre-compiled version, but if you build it from code,
I
then
have
it's
seen
free.
that.
Do you think Blender would ever do something like that?
What does the future of Blender development look like? It's kind of this interesting crossroads, a little bit of like Blender's opening up to more platforms. Like there's going to be Blender for iPad that's already in the works. I think they'll extend it to tablets in general after that, where touchscreens are more of a thing and things like that is going to open a lot of possibilities.
3D being a challenge, a craft that takes a lot of time and a lot of like knowledge about the world to inform it effectively. Like this is what makes it compelling, what makes it rewarding and satisfying.
There's nothing on screen that you see that's me per se, but I'm just basically making sure that it's smooth for all the artists that do get their stuff on screen.
Welcome to this conversation with Spencer Magnusson, Blender enthusiast, instructor, add-on developer, and pipeline engineer at Dreamworks. Earlier this year, Spencer published Utility with CG Cookie, teaching us how to script our first Blender add-on. Today, we're discussing the future of Blender development, Ton retiring, the crossroads of AI and creativity, and more. I want to ask how BCon went. This is supposed to be your first day back, or no, first week back from Amsterdam, but you had to bail because you got ill, apparently, and this is not the first time that it's happened.
Yeah. So this time, for those who don't know, I got the norovirus, like, it was literally like 2 nights before my flight, and I was just really sick, and I knew of like, there's no way I could be on a flight with this. So I had to cancel, and then the year before it was some type of nasty like cold, and I wasn't sure if it was COVID or not, and I didn't want to risk it, and so I just stopped. And I was supposed to present both times as well.
Dude,
So,
that's
yeah.
awful. I guess the time of year, it shouldn't surprise us too much, but man, that is unfortunate. So how many times have you been to BCon?
Yeah. The only one I've been to is the LA one.
Really?
So that's the only one. Yeah.
I thought you would have said I've been to 5 of them and 2 of them I had to cancel, but both times
That'd be nice.
got canceled.
Yeah.
So a big kind of announcement from BCon 2025 was Ton's retirement. How did that hit you?
Yeah, for me, I feel like I'd been kind of keeping tabs a little bit on it, so it wasn't as much of a surprise for me. I know in their vlog videos, like the studio vlogs, they had a segment where Francesco was kind of like taking some of the responsibilities from Ton. And Ton's talked about he had a health scare, I think, a few years back, and he had kind of wanted to make sure that Blender never halted because of him getting sick and things like that. And so I knew it was kind of coming up a little bit, like that at least at some point he would. I kind of figured it would be until there was like another health scare or something else that kind of got him of like, okay, I'm done. So I was a little bit surprised that it was just so soon, but I've met Francesco and I've seen him work on the stuff recently, and I have no worries about him at this point. So
I agree too. And I think it has been, my understanding historically was similar, like his health scare and what that, got the wheels turning for secession and succession.
Right.
And
you're good.
Yeah, and so I think Francesco's going to do a great job. I think he's built a very strong organization in the Blender Foundation, Blender Studio. Of course, though, in the comments of the video, I saw someone, my words, Blender's going to be a subscription model soon enough. And I kind of rarely do I try engage with that, but I did, and we went back and forth a little bit. But ultimately, it was a good exchange, but it brought something up that I'd never considered. Again, this is like, will Blender always be 100% free or not? And apparently there is open source software that is open source, but they charge for compiling. There's a fee to get a pre-compiled version, but if you build it from code, then it's free.
That.
Do you think Blender would ever do something like that?
I mean, they already have the infrastructure for building. I hope that's not the case. Yeah, because I have seen those where with open source where it's like the code is freely available, but to have it compiled and built, they want you to buy it. I have seen some as well where the company was initially open source with it, and they decided that they needed more money, and so they basically left behind the open source version and then just kind of branched off with their freemium or paid version. So I think the short answer is, legally, I don't think Blender could just switch to being paid. They kind of have to branch off a bit to have that happen. So my case is, it's very unlikely, and if they did, they would kind of have to branch off, and people could just maintain the normal open source Blender as it is, and then it would just be kind of like two separate versions, kind of like with Blender Game Engine a little bit, albeit that's still GPL, but kind of like with that, just two different versions is my guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it seems that it's never been a concern for me really ever seriously since I've been a Blender artist, but and to get this far, like to be a champion of open source and like a leader, absolutely. A pioneer in some ways for what it's done. What an about face it would be to ever do something like that. It just seems so far. The big thing is the community is their number one feature, right. And it's like that would destroy that whole mission. Anyway,
right? Yeah. As in, they just did their big push for like the personal donations and contributions as well, because they kind of wanted to have more of a foundation outside of the corporate donations. So yeah, I would hope that it wouldn't kind of be anticlimactic in that way. And for when I met Francesco at the LA conference, like he's very much willing to like work with people and like talk to companies and whatnot, but he also has very strong opinions as well. So
yeah, okay.
I think he's at least going to do all he can, at least before getting to that point.
That makes sense. I'm sure Tan would not make this decision lightly, and after a lot of vetting for a long time. So yeah, it's funny how that question never seems to die. You know, Blender's going to be paid at some point. But all right, so you taught the course Utility for Us. You are a technical oriented artist. You develop for Blender, develop add-ons, and just kind of a baseline question. Did you get into 3D as an artist who discovered your inclination towards development, or did you start technically, developmentally oriented, who discovered 3D as the most interesting application of those skills?
That's a great question, because it's like, I feel like the answer is just like kind of started with both a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, I'll get into a lot of it. So it's like my dad was a programmer. He was very much in like programming, like computer chips type of programming, so kind of like very close to the computer type of programming and whatnot. So a lot of programming is from that, and I had kind of started in game development as a teenager. I was kind of very ambitious, I'm going to make a full multiplayer game and all that, And I also had kind of a lot of creative outlets as well. I did a lot of drawing and creative writing, and writing stories as well. And so with the game development, what got me started with Blender was that I was using Unity with the game engine at the time, and I was thinking of like, I need to actually make the 3D models. I don't want just cubes everywhere. And so then I was able to find Blender, since it was free and open source, and plead with my parents to let me download it and everything. So that's how I first started with Blender. It was kind of very on and off from the beginning with Blender, of trying different things, kind of taking breaks from it and then coming back to it. And of course, the game development part didn't really come to pass, but I definitely got more into Blender when I think it was 2.6, when the kind of the VFX features all started coming in, and that's kind of when I had the idea of trying to use Blender for visual effects and film stuff. And so I've made a couple very cringy animated shorts as a teenager, and got to help in college making some VFX stuff as well. So that's kind of how it's kind of always been for me, of just kind of like almost kind of writing both the technical and artistic aspects for a lot of it, and kind of just doing both a little bit. I kind of mentioned this at the LA conference talk as well, that I was kind of just doing both and trying to like accept of like, I don't have to always do one. It definitely takes a lot of your time if you're trying to do both. But for me, like feeling like just letting myself at least try things as I like them, and not trying to force it of like, I have to do it this way or do this way. Because it's not my full-time job, so I don't feel like I have to have that pressure of doing just one of them. So trying to at least have that balance.
Yeah, okay. I'm afraid it is a bit of a stereotype, but it's way more common to see artists or Blender users lean more towards development and technical things and struggle with the art, and vice versa.
Mm,
And for you
yeah.
to have both is fascinating. I saw that you mentioned writing, and I saw that you've been a quarter finalist in a screenplay writing contest. So writing narratives is something that you do or you have done. Do you still write?
I say that was a deep at the very bottom of my LinkedIn. I'm impressed that you caught that. So for context, it was for a screenwriting contest that was, I think, a few years back, and by quarter finalists, it was like the top 25% of entries. So there's probably like 100 people ahead of me. But
Still, I'd be proud of this. I'm not a great writer, so I'd be very proud of this.
so yeah, so the writing, like I've been kind of going back to it a lot more recently, and I think part of that is kind of going back to my roots. And I think part of it is that because I did writing for so long as a kid, the writing is still very much natural to me in terms of writing down my stories. Because with writing, it's like the effort of writing down the words is exactly what people will get when reading it. But with something like Blender, you put in a lot of effort of simulations, animations, and stuff just for what someone will see for one frame, right?
True.
And so it's kind of a more direct medium in that way. And so I think for many of my stories, that's kind of what I've been comfortable with. And as I've gotten older, it's kind of the realization that there are stories that I want to tell, and for some of them, writing makes more sense. I do have some ideas of animation kind of under the hood that I'm wanting as well, but just basically it's kind of like finding the ways to tell the stories that I want to tell. And writing is very much one of those ways I'm comfortable with. So I think I do have it. I am writing. I think it's more of just kind of deciding how to channel and choose and prioritize for the most part.
Well, admittedly, I'm jealous. I think out of all of my 3D and even creative, beyond 3D creative skills, writing is one that the older I get, the more experience I get, the more I realize how important that is to even make compelling renders, make compelling short animations. And it's a skill I have not developed, or maybe don't even have much of a gift for. So I'm very envious that you do that and you're good at it. So, all right. So you are a Blender enthusiast by night, but by day, you're a pipeline engineer at Dreamworks Animation. Dreamworks is the dream job for many 3D artists and animators. Is that yours as well?
That's a good question. I would say the answer is yes. I will also say I don't think I ever thought of Dreamworks specifically like that as a kid, of like, I'm going to Dreamworks, when I was 6 years old or something. I don't have that type of mindset about it. Like, as a kid, I loved Dreamworks, loved Pixar, loved Blue Sky. May that studio rest in peace. But I think for me, it was very much just like the animation and storytelling that very much appealed to that. And for me, as working as a pipeline engineer at Dreamworks, for those who don't know what a pipeline engineer is, pipeline is just kind of the CG pipeline of going from modeling something to rigging something to character shading, texturing, rendering. And pipeline engineer is me just kind of organizing everything that goes in between to make sure that process goes smoothly. So it's not like an artist is trying to hand something over to another artist and they're like, I don't have the things ready. You need to go back and export it right, or things like that. So that's kind of what pipeline engineering is. But it's nice to be able to have that bird's eye view a little bit of what artists do and what's valuable to them. I don't think I ever thought of it like a specific company as a dream company. I don't know if that's if that's kind of a weird thing as a kid, but it was very much just kind of the entirety of animation and film and storytelling.
Right. Yeah, I think that animation and VFX can maybe be the unsung hero of Hollywood in a lot of ways, especially with what's going on now of claiming things aren't a CG free movie and basically lying about that stuff. But within animation, I feel like pipeline TDs are probably the most unsung heroes. So do you touch like everything, or are you specifically being utilized in like a character, the animation pipeline, or rigging or the modeling department?
Right.
Like, is it everything or something specific?
That's a good question. With me, I mean, it's going to be varied per person and per team and things like that. So for reference, like there's the artists that are doing the man animation and all that actual work. Then there's TDs, or technical developers. They tend to be the ones that are working more directly with the artists of like, for this movie, we need this thing. Let me try to script something for that. And for me as a pipeline engineer, I'm kind of the programmers serving the TDs a little bit. So it's like, as the TDs are working on things, they're maybe like, oh, wait, we need a tool that makes this process easier so we can help the artists. Could you, the pipeline engineer, help put that together so that we're not having to do it for every movie every time type of feeling. So that's kind of my role. So it's whenever people ask, I'm like, there's nothing on screen that you see that's me per se, but I'm just basically making sure that it's smooth for all the artists that do get their stuff on screen.
Oh yeah, which is a ton of stuff. I can only imagine when I was at Real Effects and like these people keep the machine oiled and running. So super important job. I guess it's pretty fun having, I imagine, a new challenge every day, a different situation to solve for constantly. You enjoy that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely much like a problem solver of like, yeah, there's always going to be cases where it's like, oh, we have this software and this software. We just upgraded this software, but now it's no longer compatible with this tool that we have. Like there's a lot of things that change, not like by the day, but just like with each movie that gives new problems to solve and trying to keep things up to date and streamlined so that way other programmers aren't slowed down by how things are set up. But yeah, it's very much lots of new changes constantly and very much trying to focus on what the artists need and like what's important to them. Because I could just make a bunch of tools, but they're like, great, we'd never use these because our workflow's way different, you know? So it's like, you kind of have to start from them of what's important to them for their show, and then work back from that of what's good for everyone.
Sure. Are artists enjoyable to work for? Like, can they explain the problem effectively, and are they grateful when you solve it?
I mean, they're absolutely grateful for solving it. I think it's more of that artists and programmers are going to see things very differently. For the artists, like for them, it's the workflow and how many buttons do I have to press, you know, a little bit, that sometimes they're like, well, I always go to this menu, so having a button here would be nice. And you're like, well, maybe you could have it just be included with this other thing. You know, it's kind of more just me as a programmer is going to see the solution very differently versus how the artist is going to see it. You kind of see this with how Blender's UI and user experience has changed over the last several years. Like back to Blender 2.4 up to 2.8, all the features were there. They were available, but they were rarely like intuitive or easy to find, where people are like, oh yeah, that feature's always been there. And they're like, I never knew that. And it's like, oh, it's in this, you know, menu and this keyboard shortcut, which you would have never figured out on your own. So it's kind of like Blender is for developers a little bit. And it takes a lot of effort from the feedback side and from real artists to be able to say, okay, let's focus on first how the artists want and need it and making it intuitive from that point. So that way we have all the features and that's still available, making sure it's intuitive for the artists that aren't technically minded. So it's very much a perspective thing, and you have to keep that in mind whenever you're developing tools.
Makes sense. So what do you think? I can't avoid asking the AI question. AI is shaking up a lot about creativity, about programming, tool development. So what do you think Blender's going to look like based on, you know, what they've said that their approach to AI is? You as an add-on developer, like, how is AI affecting? Trying not to keep the question too big, but let's just start with, are you more optimistic or pessimistic or in between for the AI and Blender's development?
That's a good question. I mean, at least of citing of what Francesco has said, like, I think it was not this year, but last year, of that he's like, we want to implement AI, but we want to only implement it where it makes sense with AI. And kind of AI has just kind of become a little bit of a catchword of like, that's how you're solving the problem, where it's like, you could probably do it with just normal programming. You don't need like an AI to actually do it, right? I think thankfully the Blender team is very technically minded enough that they're only going to use it in the way that really makes sense. Like, AI is already technically in Blender. Like, AI is kind of utilized as part of denoising, like the open image denoise. And so it's kind of already in there for those that are worried of it will ever enter. It's already in there. But I think from a technical standpoint, I think the developers are smart enough to feel like where it actually makes sense to use AI versus just something else. So I'm optimistic in that side of things, that I think they'll only have AI natively in Blender where it actually makes sense. Because also with AI, it's kind of a legal mess in terms of, because you have to be very certain of everything you're training your AI on as legal. Like with GPL, it's very specific and of how things are being used. Like with the NVIDIA DLSS demo that was at SIGGRAPH, the Blender devs had talked about like that was kind of experimental. Like we can't really commit to it being in Blender because it's NVIDIA stuff and it'd be kind of a lot of legal stuff to unwrap just to have it part of Blender natively. So with AI, it's kind of a bit of a rabbit hole right now. And I think it'll take a lot for things to settle legally speaking, just to be able to have that be easy to implement, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. That is such a key question as I try and figure out we all are trying to understand how we engage with this new technology. But the way that the Blender devs are saying where it makes sense, that's such a challenge for me to find those times. But I do have a couple of them where it has just clicked, and me as the artist and the creative, the AI as the tool, it's worked in a symbiosis kind of relationship. Do you have any examples of it working really well as a tool in your experience?
Just AI in general.
Yeah, like that, to fill out that where it makes sense phrase.
Right. Yeah. With AI, it's like very much an experimental phase, kind of like companies are just kind of throwing the money and effort at it to try to see how far it can go. So for me, the parts of AI where like that it's been used really effectively is where the AI is like specifically trained and like localized for specific use cases. I've seen it being used a lot for like visual effects. For example, like with Sinners that just came out, Michael B. Jordan playing a set of twins. So they used a lot of CG, and I think that was still very much part of the final result. But they also, part of the behind the scenes is that deepfakes were kind of used as part of that process, at least for reference or some of the compositing. I don't know how fully it was used, but they had like a bunch of cameras on set. Like they had like a thing that Michael would wear that would just take a bunch of pictures of him on set to get like the lighting and reference. And so certainly that would have been used as part of like those deepfakes and training data. But there's been kind of more uses of that, like with last Indiana Jones movie, Dial of Destiny, even The Irishman from a few years ago, the crime movie with Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci. They also kind of used AI as kind of at least as a reference and things like that. And what I love about those cases is that they take advantage of, instead of trying to be of like, well, let's just train the AI on everything, but it's like very fine-tuned, very localized, specific training and usage of the AI, I think in some ways is more effective and usually is more like efficient from a data and power usage perspective, of that you can get a lot more out of it just by having those specific cases, as opposed to like a Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot that's trying to do everything and generate anything, you know? So that's kind of the symbiosis that I'm hoping for with artists, is that kind of like very tailored to their art or, you know, the animation or things like that. Just kind of that very focused usage.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So when it comes to Blender development scripting, I had a season where I've always been like artist first, I guess. And so the technical side, I can only go so far before I kind of hit a brick wall. But there was a period where for a year, I got into Python. I was writing my own tools and just look back very fondly at that time. I also ran into like updating issues where I had made so many tools that keeping them updated with current Blender became kind of a bigger hassle than I was willing to do. So I fell out of the habit, but being able to break through that technical wall and then wield Blender in a way that you really can't without, you know, accessing it with code.
Right.
It's such a powerful skill set that, I mean, is it fair to say that it's underrated in the Blender community? There are not as many people trying that. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. Programming in general can be very daunting, especially like to like artists that aren't technically minded. I've sometimes joked of that it's a bit of a perfectionist hobby, that it's like making sure everything works perfectly, you know, runs fast and all those things. And you kind of have to, at least as you get farther into it, you have to know of how the computer works and like how it handles decimal numbers, and like there's kind of a lot of quirks and nuances a little bit to it. But the best part of Blender, it's a very low barrier of entry. You can download it and it's a full Python scripting workspace. So like you can just run like normal Python code in it and code and develop with it perfectly fine. I think the hard part is that because it's very low barrier of entry, that people start it, like people kind of are aware of programming and maybe have, copied and run a few lines and things like that. But it's kind of the next steps a little bit of going from just knowing how to copy and paste some code from AI or for somewhere else to understanding how to build the code and get something to run is kind of a lot more effort because Blender starts with such a low barrier of entry with programming, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, so I understand from Superhive that the add-on developers are by far the highest earning types of products there. Has that been true in your experience, that scripting, programming still offers a lot of career potential or financial potential in this space?
Yeah, I would say, for disclaimer, I am not a full-time add-on developer. Like, it's not my full-time job. But there are definitely several creators on Superhive I know that are full-time add-on developers or product developers. And so I think there is quite a wide variety of potential with add-ons. I was actually thinking about this of like, with your question of what does the future of Blender development look like? It's kind of this interesting crossroads, a little bit of like Blender's opening up to more platforms. Like there's going to be Blender for iPad that's already in the works. I think they'll extend it to tablets in general after that. Windows ARM devices, which is more like Windows tablets. And so having that sphere of things of where touchscreens are more of a thing and things like that is going to open a lot of possibilities. And also scripting for cameras, because with Cycles recently, I think it was at this last conference, they announced of how they're making scripted cameras available for Cycles. So that way you can have like cameras that more simulate real lenses within Blender with scripts. So I think that's going to kind of extend it. But I've kind of been seeing add-ons and scripting more as part of the assets instead of like just the tools themselves. For example, geometry node tools, and that's been a big thing in the last few releases. That way geometry nodes can be like act as normal buttons. So it's like add this geometry node and apply it to the mesh. You don't really need add-on mesh generation and modification add-ons as much because you can just do them as tools. Shader nodes has become more complex as well. Also the asset browser, and they're working on repositories. So like with extension repositories, they're going to be asset repositories. And I really hope that asset manager add-ons really take note of that, because I know with asset manager add-ons, like with Polygon and BlendKit and so many others, it's like, well, there's all these features built into the add-on to handle all this stuff. But I really hope add-ons kind of try to take advantage of the remote asset repositories and kind of opening that to just native asset repositories within Blender, as opposed to having a dozen different add-ons just to manage assets from all these different websites and companies. So there's a lot of opening of how you can kind of implement tools in Blender. So add-ons aren't always the answer. Like you should still learn how to do all add-ons in different use cases, but sometimes some tools makes more sense as geometry nodes or the remote asset repository, things like that. And so I feel like Blender's kind of trying to open it more to more asset-oriented tools as opposed to just add-ons themselves, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned geometry nodes, and I my experience, it's kind of like visual scripting, almost visual programming. Have you been able to like take to geometry nodes a little easier since that you are a programmer?
Yeah, for me, like I've definitely dived into geometry nodes, and it definitely makes more sense with a program perspective of like each node is a function and the sockets are inputs and outputs. I've even like some of the painterly stuff that I've shared in my free time has been geometry nodes based. But it's one of those things of like, even knowing programming, there's aspects of geometry nodes that I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around.
Oh, wow.
Because Well, because with programming, for instance, like there's things like with for loops where you can like say, okay, for this cube, add this. For this cube, add this. For this cube, add this. Whereas with geometry nodes, the workflow is kind of more of on everything, do this. Like it's almost kind of like a batch operation in a way for a lot of it. And so you kind of have to think about it very differently from that perspective. And so that part I have a really hard time with, because with some people, like with the meshes, like, oh yeah, you just applied it to all and you select all these things and, manipulate by that. And it still isn't fully clicking for me. And so I kind of go back and forth a little bit of like, well, maybe I'll just do it as a script. Having either one definitely crosses over into the other in terms of learning and understanding kind of how it works.
Okay. Man, I'm a little taken back that there's parts of it that are even challenging for you, because it sounds like it's like a different mindset than the way you program. Okay.
Exactly. And you can still program that way like you would in geometry nodes, but it's kind of the same thing. Like there's Python libraries that famously kind of operate that way of like operating on everything at once. And in my mind, I'm still just like, I don't get that library. NumPy, for those that know with Python, like it very much acts that way of like, you give it a huge list and it's like, okay, all the operations operate on the entire thing a little bit, instead of you're not supposed to just iterate over each one. You're just supposed to operate on it all at once, So it's very much kind of a perspective shift with that.
Well, I find you interesting in that, Blender, it sounds like maybe Blender was your first like platform for engaging with computer graphics. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
okay.
I'd say that. Along with Unity, yeah.
And then you develop marketable skills, you land a great job at a top studio, but you still maintain this Blender enthusiasm. Why do you think that is? What is it about Blender that keeps you excited and engaged?
It's a great question. I think part of it is the accessibility that comes with open source, like that any feature virtually can be possible to implement with Blender, of that even if you can't do it with an add-on, you can still download the Blender source code and implement the feature yourself. I think it's very much of open it is in terms of those possibilities, where it's kind of like, and I mean, every 3D software is kind of built that way, of trying to allow modularity and things like that. But I think Blender kind of puts it to a new level where you can be like, well, if you don't like how this thing's structured or how this thing is done, you can change it. Like Blender for Artists, the fork that's kind of more oriented on the UI and user experience. There's that version. There's the Blender game engine. There's the Goo engine. And it kind of has this this very open accessibility to it. And I think I just like that ability to be able to just jump in and tackle problems, or, make a cool render or something. And it just feels so accessible to me in that way. And granted, to the new users that are complaining about Blender being hard, is like, I've been using Blender for over, I think, probably nearly 15 years now at this point, actually. And so I've been very comfortable with it. And so I also kind of know the why it works under the hood a little bit as well. That was kind of the optimization series that I put online as well. And it's very much of, with that understanding, and be able to see of like, yeah, you really can do just about anything with Blender. I think that's the inspiring part to me very much.
Okay. You mentioned that it's hard, and there are new users often, I think, are kind of struck by how difficult Blender is. And I think 3D in general is very hard, and Blender's just their first experience with 3D.
Absolutely.
And I get this a lot being a teacher. And, there's a lot built around trying to make it easier, taught people to try and simplify it and make it digestible. And there's nothing wrong with that. But AI, the promise is that we can do this stuff even easier. There's a million add-ons that can make every task easier and easier. And maybe it's my age too, but there's part of me that wants to take a step back and say 3D being a challenge, a craft that takes a lot of time and a lot of like knowledge about the world to inform it effectively. Like this is what makes it compelling, what makes it rewarding and satisfying as a craft. And so I'm trying to figure out how to encourage people don't fight the difficulty, but embrace it as part of the journey and why it's going to feel so rewarding in the end. Do you think that's fair, or am I missing something? It should be easier, basically.
In terms of like when people make specific complaints about Blender, of like Blender should have this with the UI and, you know, these specific things, like usually in a way, like most of the time they are right. There's actually like usually entire add-ons work around the idea of that Blender's doing something wrong, so let's fix it. But I think very much I agree with you of like letting yourself accept the struggle, but also like just the effort of it. Usually what I tell people with Blender when they're first starting out, don't try to do everything. I think we see the stories of Ian Hubert. We see kind of the one-man army type of artists and things like that of doing everything. And I mean, with Ian, it's like he had started with VFX and he did just VFX for a long time and then kind of went into the more full, like telling full stories and things like that. And so with kind of an anecdote of, there's a lot of art museums near my house, like probably like at least 3 or so within an hour of my house. We tend to go to them every once in a while. And there's something about with fine art of just seeing the process visually in the result and kind of seeing the effort behind it, that you very much connect with the artist even though they're not there. And I think with art, especially like as new generations are trying art in Blender, they kind of have this realization of like, well, art is quite vulnerable. It's quite self-exploratory. It requires a lot of effort. Of just because you know a lot of shortcuts doesn't mean the effort itself is really any less, because you're doing this thing that's very exploratory and vulnerable. And I think AI can sometimes become a coping mechanism almost in that way of just like, I don't have to worry about the effort in between. I can just ask something to make this thing for me. And there's definitely uses for AI. I'm not a anti-AI in any way, but there is definitely a value in the time and effort in doing something. And the art is something worth wasting time for and taking effort for, in a way that you kind of have to be okay with that process, because that is kind of an essence of art in a way to me, of that self-expression and the effort that comes along with it, because that makes the art in a way, regardless of the medium.
I love how you said that. It resonates deeply with me. And when I extrapolate out what Blender becoming easier and easier to do, and 3D becoming so accessible that like it can be prompted, that's the kind of the extreme with AI. It becomes so easy, and like that's why people would stop doing it, because I did it. Yeah, I've done some prompts and I did it like any other easy thing in my life. I do it and forget about it. And it's the stuff that that's difficult, takes hours longer than I expected, or takes years longer to develop the skills. Those are the ones I keep coming back to and I can't get enough of. And anyway, that's definitely why I love 3D and art in general. I completely agree with how you said that. I do need to say that, you've taught utility, which is a introductory scripting course. Do you have plans or goals to teach anything next, and what kind of next step would there be after utility?
That's true. Like I've definitely thought about it in terms of what would be the next steps. I think a lot of it is, there's a lot of the next steps that would just be kind of coding in general, and it would be hard for some of it to feel like it's Blender specific. Like it'd still be valuable to users and like having that knowledge and understanding. But at the same time, it's of like, well, how much of that is Blender specific versus just, learning programming? So I've definitely thought about it and been open to it. It is a lot of time for me of balancing, full-time job as well as doing a course. Kind of this balance of trying to make something valuable to the user, of like, oh, this is an add-on I would love to have, but that could also be too much effort. And so you try to be like, well, maybe I'll make it more approachable. And then people would see and be like, why would that be an add-on? With some of the things in the course, like I admit, of like, some of this is already included in Blender, but the point is that it's, practice and example and things like that. So it's kind of that hard balance of, if like, if it's too valuable, then people are like, why don't you just sell the add-on itself at that point? And then with the other directions of like, well, I could like, that's something already in Blender. So it's kind of also trying to find that balance of with whatever the product is of making it meaningful, but not overly approachable as well.
Yeah. Kind of comes down to the expectations of the student, and they're going to be all over the place, different skill levels.
Right.
But man, it's a constant challenge for me, feeling like the meat of the course was missed just because a perspective going into it was slightly off. Yeah. I don't know. There's kind of a lot of perspectives that are off a little bit in the Blender community, like some fundamental perspectives where when it comes to education, I feel like almost everything has been taught. You know, maybe not to the deepest level, but every kind of subject, kind of skill set has been addressed at some point in the last 15 years. And so everyone kind of knows the tools to some degree. If they don't, there's countless free beginners, introductory courses. But it's like we've got a lot of people sitting around with these skills, but they're very aware of the trees, but not the forest. I don't know if I'm wrong about this, but it's like we need some wisdom in the Blender community and less how to do things. I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all?
I get what you're saying. I think especially like with education being so digital and virtual at this point, that people kind of think knowledge is the end goal of just knowing things. And I think that's kind of the appeal with AI as well, of like, well, it apparently knows everything, so that's it, right? But as you said, of like, yeah, there's a wisdom of like, when to do things, when it's more reasonable to do this strategy or this method versus a different one. And even just experience. One of the VFX supervisors I worked with, that they were like, don't overconsume tutorials and not do anything. That feeling of like just watching video tutorials on YouTube and not do anything about it, just like, oh, that's cool, skip to the next video. And I think that's what I like with courses, especially like with how CG Cookie designs their courses, that it's very engaging. Like there's like homework for so many of them, and part of the learning is the engagement and experience, and not just consuming knowledge and thinking you're book smart even though you've never done it. I definitely agree though, of like the knowledge tree is kind of is big enough, but we need all the other trees to make sense of everything.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. That was very well said. Just the more having worked with you on the utility course and through this conversation, meeting you at BCon LA, you have that sort of wisdom that I hope continues to be shared and permeates the community. So thank you for
appreciate
spending this time with me today, and look forward to speaking again.
Of course, right back at you.